Good evening to all of you. So, myself Amit Sinha, and I welcome all of you to this short and very crisp discussion over the question paper analysis of history optional of last year's paper of 2019 conducted by UPSC. See, as you know that we have two papers in history as an optional, paper 1 and paper 2. So today I will be discussing very briefly some of the questions of the paper 1, that is history paper 1, that is optional 1 paper. And as you know that in paper 1 you have the segments, in fact 3 segments I would say in this particular manner. One is that of course the mapping segment that is there. Then you have also the questions of ancient India, and then the questions of medieval India. And as you know that there are certain compulsory question numbers also. Question number 1 and 5 are always compulsory, and then you are supposed to answer at least 3 out of any of the sections, or the section A or section B, and then at least 2 questions from section any of these 2 sections. So in totality you have to write almost, let's say, 7 questions including the map. In fact, that is the idea about the entire paper. Now today I am discussing with all of you the questions of 2019 history optional main examination briefly. Alright, I would love to actually explain it in an elaborate manner, but since there is a paucity of time, and of course there is a limitation also of releasing the videos on various platforms like YouTube, so therefore I will try to keep myself very limited in terms of discussing those aspects, but those discussion would be sufficient enough to give you insight about how to approach those answers or those questions. Fine. So let me start with the very first question. You can see on your screen, this is the question paper of 2019 UPSC main examination of history optional. Fine. So I'm starting with of course the questions of history only, in fact ancient India only, and I'm skipping here one question, that is actually the mapping question, which we'll discuss in a separate class only on mapping. So if you can see on your screen that you have a question like, first of all, that is, do you agree that archaeological evidence often helps in the better understanding of literary sources? That's the very first question asked in your main examination of 2019. And then it is asking you comment, that is how you have to give your opinion. Alright. So what is your opinion regarding this particular question? That's what actually was the question. Now see, when such kind of questions are asked to comment upon certain things, it doesn't mean that they are asking your the question. The examiner is asking your opinion basically. It is basically the standard opinion of historians, of scholars, that are supposed to be written there in the answer. That is one thing you have to keep in mind always, first of all. Secondly, that since this question is asking that do you agree that archaeological evidence often helps in the better understanding of literary sources. So the point that we have to first of all understand is that literary sources are of various types. Alright, of course we have the domestic literary sources, also foreign sources. So those sources actually contribute in the reconstruction of entire historical development of India. So there's no doubt about it that when we say that we are studying history, it simply means that since the time when we have got the literary evidences to reconstruct the history of India, that's what actually we call it as a history. Fine. So of course history is all about the evidences, and those evidences are primarily in the form of the literary sources and also the archaeological sources. So obviously we have the advantage of multiple literary sources written in domestic, in fact in India and also outside India, and those all sources we take into consideration while reconstructing the entire episode of ancient Indian history. So that is one aspect. Definitely we have certain limitations also in the literary sources, and those limitations are actually you can say compensated through the archaeological sources. Fine. Because in literary sources always you have seen, or we have been seeing, that literary sources have always been in the form of the eology or the royal courts historians or the authors. They used to write down the entire history of that particular era. So most likely the literary sources were written in ancient India were mainly patronized by the courts and the kings only. Therefore it was highly in the context of praising the role of a king, or praising the entire, you can say, kingdom at that point of time. Therefore the literary sources of ancient India, they used to give us a sort of a top-down approach in understanding the entire reconstruction of history of India. Alright, that is what actually was the basic understanding of literary sources. Fine. Then, of course, archaeological sources, they actually support our understanding of literary sources only. And once archaeological sources support the literary sources, it becomes always, you can say, a factual evidence in terms of the reconstruction of history of any particular part of the world, and also in India. And therefore, you can understand, even the scholar like E.H. Carr had very nicely stated about that the facts about history is something that we have to understand at how it is being interpreted by the historians. Alright, that's what actually is the concept of facts according to E.H. Carr. So exactly, we have to understand the archaeological sources actually give us certain facts, certain evidences for our of course interpretation of over any episode of history. So archaeological sources, they corroborate the entire literary sources, and therefore it actually gives us a balanced picture of any particular historical event in the past incident. Fine. Therefore, if you see the examples like the modern period, the examples like the postmodern period, when we have ample of archaeological and also literary sources, therefore we actually have a great information regarding these all periods. On the other hand, when we enter into the era of, let's say, the Harappans, we have one advantage of archaeological sources, but we have a limitation of literary sources. Similarly, when we enter into the era of the Vedic period, we have the advantage of literary sources, but we don't have the same advantage in the form of archaeological sources. Therefore, we have certain limitations in terms of interpretation of the entire history of either Harappa or also in the context of the Vedic culture. So, in the context of that only, when we got the informations, in fact, in literary sources from the Buddhism era, of course, from 6th century BCE, then onwards we find that we actually start reconstructing the entire history on a very organized and a very balanced manner. That's what actually is the advantage of having the sources in both the form, that is archaeological as well as the literary sources. So exactly this is what you are supposed to write in the answer. Fine. And that analysis was supposed to be written in the answer of question number 1. Fine. Then similarly, you have this next question, that is the development of art and architecture during the Sunga period belies the belief that they were anti-Buddhist. Discuss. Now see, idea is that the most remarkable example of the art and architecture, the Buddhist art and architecture in the Sunga period has been the Bharut Stupa. The Bharut Stupa was constructed during the period of Sunga time only, and most importantly, Sachi Stupa was also further, you can say, embellished during the Sunga period only. So by this logic, we can simply say the Sunga were not anti-Buddhist as it has been interpreted by many of the scholars in terms of Sungas being the patron of the you can say the Hindu or so-called the Brahmanical system at that point of time. So the Sungas were said to be the followers of either the Vishnu or the Shivas, alright, and that's the reason why they were actually supporter of Brahmanical order, and here therefore, according to some historians, they were anti-Buddhist in their, of course, in their attitude, in their approach. But seeing the development of art and architecture at that particular period of time, of course, it belies the entire belief that they were anti-Buddhist. So exactly this is what you were supposed to discuss in the question number 2. Fine. So that is what actually was there. Similarly, you have the next question, that is question number 2C. The 2C is equally very interesting question, and the 2C is saying that did the mastery over agriculture act as a leverage for the rise of Harappan towns and cities? Discuss. Now this is a very interesting question. This is a very interesting question, and that's the reason why you can see this question has been asked in 20 marks. Alright. So that is the importance of this question. You can see now on your screen what this question is talking about. This question is talking about one very important aspect, and it says that whether agriculture was the base for the rise of the urban areas or the cities in the Harappans. So what actually is this analysis? You see, understand this analysis. Now agriculture, actually, when agriculture became a formidable part of occupation of the Harappans, obviously it actually gave them very important advantage in the form of, you can see on your screen, and that is in the form of the surplus production. Now see, when they got the surplus production, of course, beyond their own consumption, beyond their own need, then only they started thinking for also either exporting it or also selling it in the market. So exporting or selling in the market could have been possible only when they had surplus. So once they got this particular ability of sell the products, sell the agricultural products also in the market, obviously they needed market for that. So in that way market got developed, and where in the market, of course, the exchange system also got developed. Alright, exchange system also got developed. Earlier, of course, the barter system was only prevailing at that point of time, but it is even the barter system that got developed at that point of time. And once the barter system got developed, of course, this exchange system could have been only possible when there were other categories of population who were involved in the non-farm activities. Non-farm activities like potters, like bead makers, like jewelers, etc. So they were also involved in the non-farm activities. So of course it gave to the birth of the development of non-farm activities, and with that only you see there is a spike in the activity of emergence of urban centers in the Harappans. So of course Harappans urban centers were primarily led by agriculture, but at the same time this was not the only factor. That's what I have to write as an answer. The factor number one was this, but the most important factor to support the urban centers of Harappa was specifically the factor number two, and that was the export economy of Harappa. So export economy of Harappa was based upon on both, that is the internal trade and also the external trade. So internal external trade both played a very important role in the rise of Harappan cities that we all know. Especially the external trade played a very pivotal role in the rise of urban centers in Harappa. So because of these factors only, you see that emergence of Harappa was quite possible as a urban civilization. So that is what precisely was the idea, and exactly this is what you were supposed to write also there in the answer in terms of this particular question. So obviously this question was supposed to written in this particular manner only. So did the mastery of agriculture act as a leverage for the rise of Harappan town cities? So obviously yes, they were producing almost every type of crop at that point of time, and of course cotton, that is called as sindan. It was a major product of Harappa which also used to be exported outside Harappa at that point of time, and we have the evidences like many of the ports in Harappa like Lothal, of course Dholavira, which were used for the exporting trading ports of Harappa at that point of time. So because of this particular factor only, of course they had got the benefit of the emergence of the towns and the cities inside Harappa. Fine, but at the same time I just told you, of course mastery of agriculture played a very important role and gave an advantage to Harappa over the other small cultures which were also parallel to Harappa, because Harappa as an area was limited only in the northern western frontier province, northern western frontier region of India. Alright, right from the region of the you can say the area of Rajasthan, Haryana, Rajasthan to Punjab, etc. But at the same time, in the other parts of India, there were other smaller cultures also. There were other cultures also, which is also known as Chalcolithic cultures of that particular era. So Chalcolithic cultures were contemporary to this particular, of course, Harappan civilization. But Harappan civilization was also having the mastery of over agriculture, and most importantly they were getting the support of the nearby small village Harappa, small village cultures of Harappa, which used to supply them the uninterrupted support of agricultural products, and that's the reason why they were also able to excel on the non-agricultural products, and therefore they were able to also conduct the external trade from Harappa. And because of that only, the rise of urban and the city areas were possible inside Harappa. This exactly was supposed to be written in the answer. That's what actually was the idea. Fine. Exactly the similar way you can see the flourishing international trade during Kusana period gave tremendous impetus to development of art. So of course it is yes. Because why? Because at this particular point of time, lot of you can say the traders unions that actually were formed. Alright. There were multiple, you can say, traders unions were formed at this particular point of time. International trade routes were discovered. The silk trade route that was quite famous at that particular point of time, and because of this flourishing international trade during the Kushana period, right from China to the northwestern part of India to Europe, of course because of these factors only, it actually gave a tremendous impetus to the you can say development of the art and architecture at that point of time. Alright, and of course the Buddha's Buddhist art and architecture got a huge impetus at this particular point of time. Therefore, you see even in the context of Afghanistan also, we were having Bamiyan Buddha's statue. Till recently, it was in news because of the Taliban's destroying and disturbing the Bamiyan Buddha statue in Afghanistan. So that is one indication that can give you the idea about the importance of the flourishing international trade during the time of Kusana period, and therefore it actually gave a huge impetus to the development of art also at that particular point of time. So in this particular manner only, you have to discuss also this particular question. Alright, in detail we'll discuss in some other video that how it will be written in the structured manner. Fine. But I'm giving you some brief idea about what is supposed to be written in every of this particular question. Then similarly you have the next question, that is the question number 3b. Examine how the transformation of the Varna system from the Rig Vedic to the later Vedic period affected the position of women. Now this is again a very important question. See, Varna system, of course, which actually we know in the context of the division of the society on the four Varnas, alright, that is Brahman, Kshatriyas, Vaishya and Sudras. Of course, this particular division actually got established by the time of the late period of early Vedic time only. And that's the reason why in the 10th mandala we actually get the information, 10th mandala of Rig Veda, we get the information about the division of society on the Varna system itself. Fine. So of course with this only we know about that the kind of patriarchy that has started taking shape in the Vedic culture itself, and by the time of, let's say, the later Vedic period, of course this patriarchy actually had become very pervasive in the Indian society, and therefore what we see in the form of Sabha Samiti, participation of women were there in the Vedic in the early Vedic period. That sort of participation has almost become extinct in the later Vedic period, and that is the reason why when you see in Sabha, particularly when women used to participate in the early Vedic or Rig Vedic period, that sort of participation was almost negligible during the time of later Vedic period. And there were multiple other practices which were derogatory against the women, like niyog, etc. So this all actually became very pervasive in the society during the time of later Vedic period. So with this, the position of women started getting into retrogressive step, and they started getting into backwardness, and that's the reason why we see the women position after the later Vedic period started gradually declining in the society. And of course patriarchy became the most dominant aspect of the nature of the Indian society right from the later Vedic period itself. Fine. That is how we have to explain this particular idea. Alright. Then we have the next question, that there are no literary sources for the Harappan culture and no archaeological evidence for the Vedic period. Explain the phenomena. That's what actually I just discussed with all of you while discussing the very first question. So what you have to understand here, we have to simply explain that it is true that we have the literary source for Harappan culture, but we have not been able to decipher because of the typical script. That is what we say, Bostro-Fedon style of writing has not been able to decipher by the scholars till now, and therefore we have the literary evidence, but we have not been able to read out them. And that is the major limitation of the historians to reconstruct the entire history of Harappa. So we have very good number of, you can say, rich or you can say sources of archaeological evidences to reconstruct the history of Harappa, but because of lack of literary sources, there are many grey areas in the entire history of Harappa to get it reconstructed in a very balanced and very, you can say, crystal clear manner. So that is precisely the limitation of the Harappan period before all of us, and that exactly applies also with the Vedic culture. So in the Vedic culture, what we have good number of literary sources in the form of the Vedic literature, that is Rig Veda and the later Vedic text also, but in this particular period we have a limited archaeological evidences also. So because of limited archaeological evidences, of course the reconstruction of entire history of the Vedic culture also has certain doubts, elements of doubts in the minds of historians, and therefore there are certain grey areas also in the entire reconstruction of history of the Vedic culture due to the lack of archaeological evidences, the way it is found in the case of Harappa. So with this particular contrast only, we have the problem in these two particular phases of history of India in terms of its complete reconstruction without any element of biasness and errors in this particular era of history of India. That is what you are supposed to precisely explain this phenomena. Alright. Then you have next question, that is explain how Asoka used religion as a tool of political aggrandizement. Now we all know that after the Kalinga war, Asoka changed completely. Alright, so he actually became from Bheri Ghosa to Dhamma Ghosa. So obviously he understood also during the time of Asoka, there were multiple religious sects that were actually emerging at that particular point of time. Alright, there were Ajivikas, there were Buddhists, there were Jains, and also there were the Brahminical order. So there were multiple, you can say, religious sects emerging at that point of time, and Asoka was having this sort of difficulty how to bring a balance among all the religious sects who are trying to dominate over each other. And that exactly was the reason that why he had to come out with his policy of Dhamma. Alright, so Dhamma policy had also come out because of this particular issues only, but at the same time, his policy of Dhamma had nothing to do with the idea of Buddhism at that point of time. So what he did, he also promoted his policy of Dhamma, and this policy of Dhamma was basically his code of conduct, and this code of conduct was basically for everyone in the era of course, the Asokas only. Fine. So that is how the entire history of Asoka was framed, and of course his entire edicts, the entire edicts of Asoka, they actually were used to propagate his entire religious ideologies at that particular point of time. So this is what you are supposed to explain also in this particular question. Fine. Now, then we have the next question, that is, do you agree that the system of land grants from the Gupta Wakataka period was connected with the decentralization of state in any way? Alright, so the point is that of course that the land grant system was not started by Gupta Wakataka period. It started right from the period of Satavahanas only. Satavahanas were the first to start offering the land grants for religious purposes. Alright, so that is how Satavahanas were known for. But during the time of Gupta Wakataka period, the land grants were donated not only for religious purpose but also for non-religious purpose. And that is how the land grant system became very dominant part of the entire administrative structure at that particular point of time during Gupta and Wakataka period. So with this, of course, the land grants also started being offered in the form of their judicial, their policing, their collection of rent rights to the person who used to get the land grant, and because of that only they also started enjoying slowly and gradually the command over the entire land and also command over the entire people who are living on those land. And slowly and gradually, when the central power start becoming weakening, of course these regional powers, or so called, you can say, the segmentary powers like the feudal lords, now they started becoming more and more powerful. So feudatories against in the era of Gupta and Wakataka period, they emerged as a powerful entity the day or the moment when the central power of Gupta and Wakataka started becoming weak, and that's the reason why you